Welcome to the Reflective Leader Podcast, where we hold up a mirror and explore how we live, how we lead, and who we're becoming along the way. I'm your host, Krista Johnson. In the last episode, I shared a handful of lessons from the last decade of my life and leadership. And thank you so much for all the love and support on that first episode. One of these lessons that I did share was around self-awareness and it being the foundation of leadership. And that reflection, supported by emotional regulation and reflection, is really the practice that sustains self-awareness. After sharing that episode, I heard from many of you who wanted me to go a little bit deeper. In fact, you shared feedback and you said, Krista, tell me more of the personal story. Don't just give me, the theory. Give me more about how these lessons actually show up in real life and in your life. So that's what today's episode is all about. I'm going to spill some vulnerable tea with all of you. We're going to slow down. We're going to explore why leaders need both regulative and reflective practices, what those practices actually look like, and the tools I call on to support me in both life and leadership. So let's get started. Leadership today is happening inside systems that are fast, they're noisy, they're ambiguous, and they're emotionally charged. These systems reward speed, they reward certainty, they reward constant output. And while the world itself feels increasingly uncertain, it feels complex, it feels emotionally loaded, most leaders I work with aren't struggling because they lack skill or they lack intelligence. They are struggling because there's no space. There is no space to think. There's no space to feel. There's no space between what happens and how they respond. In environments like this, leaders are often rewarded for reacting quickly, not for responding thoughtfully or carefully. This is where self-awareness becomes critical, and also where it can quietly erode. It erodes because there is no regulative or reflective practice to sustain it. Without regulation and reflection, it's almost as if self-awareness just remains theoretical. Leaders may know their values and how they want to show up. They may even know their triggers and what really gets under their skin. But in moments of pressure, that self-awareness, and I think even more importantly at times, the ability to act on it collapses. The nervous system takes over. Autopilot clicks on, and that's when our old patterns start to run the show. So without space to really regulate and reflect, we often find ourselves facing the same challenges again and again, even as we gain more experience and responsibility. Conflict can start to feel personal. Feedback can feel threatening. Ambiguity becomes exhausting. Stress builds quietly under the surface and then shows up everywhere. This is the environment we're leading in, and we need leaders who will stop pushing through that reality and instead build practices that create space, restore choice, and allow us to lead from intention rather than survival. Before reflection and intentional regulation became a conscious practice for me, my life looked really successful on the outside, and it was completely unsustainable and unregulated on the inside. Like many leaders, I relied on overworking as a coping strategy. When things felt hard or uncertain or stressful in my personal or my professional life, I worked more. I pushed through. I stayed busy. I told myself that this was the cost of success. Over time, my body began to tell a very different story. I would get a challenging email and I would feel my heart rate immediately spike. I would work toward a quick or a high-stakes deadline and notice a constant tightness in my shoulders and my neck, as if this tension in my body was just almost like a physical manifestation of what was happening internally. I'd have a tense conversation with someone in my personal life, and I would immediately react poorly. I was existing in, I would say, kind of a low-grade state of just constant fight or flight, even when nothing was actively wrong. So you could imagine when things were actually wrong in my personal or my professional life, that stress would just take me under. Then in 2020, a lot changed for me, and I know for a lot of us. I started experiencing migraines for the very first time. Migraines that kept me from truly living my life. They were absolutely debilitating. They disrupted my work, they disrupted my relationships, and my ability to be present in my own life. At one point, I was having over 17 migraines a month. I tried countless medications and medical interventions. Every over-the-counter and prescription medicine you can name. If it existed, I tried it. I even did occipital nerve blocks. I mean, I went to countless lengths with procedures to try to stop this. I was hoping something external would fix what was happening. Nothing addressed the root of the problem. What I didn't realize at the time was that I was not just looking for relief from migraines. I had years of chronic stress and unprocessed trauma that no migraine intervention or even talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, any of those interventions could even touch. My nervous system was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was scanning for threat, it was bracing me for impact, and it was keeping me in motion. But that is also why I was suffering physically and mentally. What we know about the nervous system is when it is in fight or flight and it's unregulated, the body is focused on protection, not perspective. In those moments, curiosity narrows, patience completely disappears. Everything feels urgent, everything feels personal. And in that state, there's very little space for choice. I could reflect after the fact. So after a challenging conversation or after whatever was going on, I could reflect back, but not in the moment. My system was already hijacked. So there was no pause between stimulus and response because my body did not feel safe enough to create one. I needed a tool in my tool belt that could help heal and regulate my nervous system preventatively before I hit a breaking point. And I needed a tool that could help almost recalibrate me when I inevitably got off track because I was going to. So more about that in a minute. Before I go also any further, I want to clearly name the difference between a regulative practice and a reflective practice because we need both. So a regulative practice supports the nervous system. So everything that we've been talking about so far in this episode. It helps the body move out of fight or flight and almost back into a state of relative safety and balance. So regulation is not about eliminating the stress. It's about almost creating enough internal steadiness that we can weather the storm. It's helping us kind of get out of that survival mode. When the nervous system is regulated, the body softens, the breath slows, and reactivity can decrease. Regulative practices work with the body first to help us create the conditions where we can be steady and the conditions we need to make intentional choices. So a reflective practice differs a bit from a regulative practice. The reflective practice helps us make meaning of our experiences. Reflection allows us to notice the patterns, question the assumptions, and almost choose how we want to show up. When we can ask, what's happening here? When we can read the situation with accuracy and clarity, and then we can decide who we want to be or how we want to show up, that's reflection. But there is a universal truth here, at least it's my truth. Reflection and the ability to reflect back requires access, but access requires regulation. We cannot regulate without access and without reflection. So back to my story here. I'd hit rock bottom, right? And I knew I had to make a change. My migraines were completely out of control. As I mentioned, my chronic stress level was through the roof. So the question was not whether I needed support, it was how was I actually going to get it and create it? Once I understood the difference between regulation and reflection, the path forward became a bit clearer. And there was a lot of research I did to help me really understand the difference. There's no single practice that works for everyone. Different practices meet us in different seasons of our lives, and often we need more than one. Some practices work primarily with the mind. Cognitive practices like journaling can help us slow our thinking and almost make meaning of our experiences. This can help us notice patterns. It can help us challenge assumptions. For some people, writing things down is what really creates that space. There are also relational practices, so dialogue, feedback, reflective conversations with trusted others help us regulate and reflect through that connection. Being seen and heard and almost mirrored by another person can bring clarity that we cannot access by ourselves. We heal in community, and we know that about ourselves. So for many leaders, this is why coaching is so powerful. It's one of the reasons I love coaching so much and why I became a coach. It creates a regulated, relational space where reflection can unfold. But when the nervous system is highly activated, cognitive and relational practices alone, those are just going to keep us stuck in our heads. There are other forms of practice that can become essential here and can help us get into our body. In fact, somatic practices work directly with the body. These include things like breath work, intentional movement, stretching, or simply bringing attention to the sensation that we have in our body through a body scan. Somatic practices support regulation first. They help the nervous system settle, which then makes reflection possible. So instead of trying to think our way into calm, we allow the body to lead. So for me, this was my missing piece. My system needed and demanded and was crying out for a way to slow down physically before my mind could even access the perspective I needed about the situation in front of me. And finally, of course, there are spiritual or contemplative practices. Things like meditation, prayer, or even moments of stillness can really help and help us find meaning, right? Help us find purpose beyond the immediate moment. These practices often support regulation by helping us feel connected to even something bigger than ourselves. So what matters most here is not the category of the practice, it's the function. Does it help regulate your nervous system? Does it create space between stimulus and response? Does it support awareness without tripping into rumination or self-judgment? Often, the most effective practice for myself and for others is a combination. Regulation first, then reflection. Body, then mind. Sometimes alone, sometimes with others in community. And as I mentioned a moment ago, breathwork became the most reliable doorway for me. It was accessible, it was immediate, and it met me exactly where I was inside my body in the moments that I needed it most. So over time, as I mentioned, breathwork really became the foundation of my regulative practice, not as something I do occasionally, but as something I return to throughout the day. There are 3 practices I use most consistently, each serving a very different purpose. The first is CCB, or conscious connected breath. So conscious connected breath is a continuous, rhythmic style of breathing where there's no pause between the inhale and the exhale. The breath flows in a steady and kind of circular pattern, usually in and out through the mouth. This is a very active breathwork practice. If you know, you know. And if you've come with me to breathwork classes in person, you know. I use this practice almost every single morning. And I'm going to tell you something even more vulnerable. I'm usually seated in the bathtub when I do it. One of my morning rituals is taking a bath, and the perfect time to do breathwork for me is in the bathtub. It brings me into my body before the day begins, and it helps regulate my nervous system, kind of getting me at a baseline level. As I'm doing this conscious connected breath in the bathtub, as I breathe, sensations and emotions and insights, they often surface. So reflection emerges kind of naturally because my body is already settled. So that's the first one. The second practice I use is pranayama. So that is a alternate nostril breathing. So this is breathing technique that involves kind of inhaling through one nostril and then exhaling through the other. And you alternate sides in kind of a slow, intentional rhythm. And that alternating pattern helps balance my nervous system. It quiets the mental noise and it drops me out of my head and back into my body. So I'll use this one midday if I notice overthinking or if I'm starting to notice my shoulders are kind of going up into my ears in that shoulder tension. And from there, I can respond more thoughtfully instead of just pushing through. And the third practice is another pranayama style, but it's called bee breath. So bee breath involves humming gently on the exhale. So you almost create like a vibration in your throat or your jaw, or your chest. And this vibration actually stimulates the vagus nerve, which plays a huge role in calming the nervous system. Look this up. This is a big one. The effect here is very surprisingly, or unsurprisingly, I guess, quick. This is the practice I turn to in moments of real need or heightened stress. So if you walked by my office midday and there's something challenging happening, you may hear me doing a bee breath. And this is when my system feels flooded or overwhelmed. That's the tool I use to regulate and recalibrate. So I can kind of find that clarity and steadiness. Now, I did not discover these practices on my own. In fact, I found breathwork through my dear friend Emily Dewberry, whose work helped me understand breath not just as a wellness practice, but as a powerful tool for regulation and reflection. Finding this through Emily completely changed my life. Her work and her approach made breathwork feel grounded. As I mentioned, it felt accessible. And Emily created an app called the Embody Edit. So if you're not in Dallas, Texas, or you're not in the city that she travels to for in-person classes, you can access her on your phone. She teaches these practices that I just mentioned above and so many others like meditation and Pilates. The Embody Edit app is something I personally use and trust, and she continues to add new content with more coming soon. And listen, like this is not a paid advertisement. None of this. This is just me truly recommending a dear friend whose work has changed my life. What I appreciate most about this is meeting you where you are. Whether you're new to breathwork or looking to deepen an existing practice, it will offer kind of the guidance and makes it foolproof. So for me, breath became the doorway back to myself. It gave me a way to regulate my nervous system, to reflect in real time, and to lead from intention rather than survival. And the goal with this episode and why I'm sharing all this is not for you to adopt my practices or for you to do breath work exactly the way I do. It's very personal. The goal is to find what helps you regulate your nervous system and create space for reflection in your own life. For some of you, that doorway may be breath, but for others, it may be journaling, it may be movement, it can even be time in nature, a meaningful, safe conversation, meditation, or even stillness. What matters is not the form. What matters is the function. Does the practice help you settle into your system? Does it create the space between stimulus and response? Does it support awareness without that self-judgment? And as I mentioned all of this earlier, if it does, it's doing its job. So as we come to a close on this episode, I want to leave you with this. Leadership today asks a lot of us. Working inside corporate systems asks a lot of us. Being a human in the world that we live in asks a lot of us. We are navigating complexity, ambiguity, and emotional weight inside systems that do not always leave room for pause. A regulative and a reflective practice is not a luxury in this environment. It's a requirement. This is a way to stay connected to yourself with all the noise around you. It's a way to stay connected to yourself while you do what I feel is the most important job in the world, and that's leading other humans. Thank you for being here. Thank you for slowing down, even briefly, and holding up the mirror with me. Until next time.